I think we call that exhaustion.
Yeah, we're live.
Okay, good morning. Today is Thursday, March 28th, 2024. This is the second half of the Senate and Food Sources and Energy morning session. We're returning at 3:11 with our council, Mr. Kowski, and continuing our walkthrough.
Right.
We stopped where?
The bottom,
Section 23?
no, section 22.
22.
So the bottom of page 20, section 22, this is kind of a random add-on, this is related but not related. So there's this, section 22 amends the downtown and village center tax credit program. So we haven't talked about this in quite a while in here, but currently there is a tax credit program. There are 4 types of tax credits under this program, and they are for eligible buildings within downtowns, village centers, and in some cases, new town, neighborhood development areas. Annually, there is a cap on the amount of tax credits that can be issued. And so at the top of page 21, currently the cap is $3 million per year in tax credits. The proposal in this bill is to increase that to $5 million per year in tax credits. I will say that this was proposed in the House. The Ways and Means Committee took it out, and it is not in the budget, as far as I'm aware. This is perhaps not the year to add $2 million in tax credits. So, just so you know, the House is not pursuing this.
Right, so tax expenditure. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's part of the base budget, because it is, lost revenue, essentially. Or not, no, don't do that. It's part of the base budget.
Okay.
So, okay, now we're on to section 23.
TEARS, got it.
That's gonna be my cabaret skit, I think, it's just tears. Oh, tears for tears. Because we got Act 250 tier, now we're adding Act 250 tiers, but the RES already has tiers. You guys, can we pick another word? I know. Oh. Apparently we can't, so. There's.
So deep in now.
We're, yeah, so other people have decided we're committed. So sections 23 through 26 relate to this new concept of what we're calling the Act 250 tiers. So you have heard about the reports, the Act 250 necessary updates report from the Natural Resources Board. This is about moving to the concept of location-based jurisdiction, which roughly is the idea that you decide where there are areas that you want to encourage development and that perhaps already have some review protections in place. So Act 250 jurisdiction isn't needed in those areas. And then on the other end of the spectrum, there are areas that have sensitivity and necessity, and so they need additional protection from Act 250. And so, and then in the middle is sort of everywhere else. And so this language, I think is fair to say, is fairly rough from the Senate Economic Development Committee. They have loosely put in a concept here, although it isn't super far off from where the House landed, but it is it's not as clear, it's a little more vague. Because they knew you were gonna work on it. So, starting on page 21, section 23. First, lines 12 and 13, there's a new jurisdictional trigger. So the construction of improvements for commercial, industrial, or residential use at or above 2,500 feet of elevation, or within a tier 3 area. So any development, commercial, industrial, residential within a tier 3 area. We'll get to that. We'll come back to that in a second. Next is the road rule. So the road rule, that language that's here, The Act 250 report didn't provide language, so what I put here is the language that your committee passed in 2020, or very close to what this committee worked on in 2020. And so I will read it to you. So jurisdictional trigger, the construction of a road, roads, driveway or driveways, which in combination is greater than 2,000 feet, and any single road or driveway is greater than 1,000 feet, to provide access to or within a tract or tracts of land of more than 1 acre owned or controlled by a person. So we are talking about a single road of more than 1,000 feet or multiple roads that equal 2,000 feet, and we're talking about roads or driveways. And there's a 1 acre parcel size threshold. So there's additional information. Adding a little bit more specificity, but this is about the construction of private roads. So for purposes of determining jurisdiction, any tract or tracts of land that will be provided access by the road or driveway is involved land. So once you construct the road, those parcels that are gonna get access are part of that and will be included in this permit.
Thank you, on page 21, line 18. Tracts of land of more than 1 acre. Owned or controlled by a person. 2 questions. One is, what if you have a road or driveway that's going to a. That's longer than the specified amount, but it is. To access a piece of land that's only like a 1/4 acre or. Half an acre, it is, so that would not be triggered. You could have very small lot sizes. And this would not apply.
Yes.
I'm not sure how I feel about that.
Yeah, well, you know, when you were reading it, I was, why did we say that? What contingency were we addressing, how we put that policy?
So that language was in the original road.
And then my second question is. The phrase owned or controlled by a person. And I know there's like, what is it, Citizens United or something like, is a. If it's really owned by a corporation or an organization or some other entity or multiple people. Does this still apply?
Yeah, person is a defined term in Act 250, and it does cover pretty much anything you can think of.
Okay.
And there's case laws spelling out that, interesting legal configurations attempting to get around that are not successful, so.
Okay, so this is the person is a broad sweeping definition that would catch pretty much everybody.
Yeah, okay, I mean, I can go back and look and see if there's anything specifically excluded, but yeah, it is not necessarily an actual person.
Which is weird that you have to say it at all then.
So. This is. The term of art in Act 250.
Oh, okay.
So that entire phrase really is tract or tracts of land owned or controlled by a person. Is in every other jurisdictional trigger.
Okay. Okay, so it's almost like for consistency as much as anything else. Okay, that's the whole thing.
So say you got a private developer and municipality would really like this development to happen. So they build the road.
We're gonna get there.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Put a pin in it.
It really is about private roads. So on to the next page, there's a lot more language. So as used in the subdivision, road shall include any new road. Or upgrade to a class 4 highway by a person other than the municipality. Including a road that will be transferred to or maintained by a municipality after its construction or update, which is sort of the inverse of the situation you were just talking about. And then for purposes of the subdivision, routine maintenance of a class 4 highway. Or stormwater improvement required under 1240-64, this title shall not constitute an upgrade. Further, routine maintenance shall include replacing a culvert or ditch, applying new stone, grading, or making repairs after adverse weather. Routine maintenance shall not include changing the size of the road, changing the location or layout of the road, or adding pavement. For purposes of determining the length of all roads and driveways within the tract or tracts of land constructed within any continuous period of 10 years after October 1, 2024, shall be included. And this subdivision shall not apply to a road constructed for a municipal, county, or state purpose. A utility corridor of an electric transmission or distribution company, or a road located entirely within a designated area, or a road used primarily for logging or forestry purposes unless used for residential purpose. So some of you may recall that in 2020, you spent a long time talking about routine maintenance and what maintenance of a road was. So that's why there's a lot of language there.
Then her parent and I had
Yes.
multiple iterations.
Yes, so you previously spent time on this, but yes, so we're talking about the construction of private roads. Primarily for residential construction, though not necessarily, that are not constructed by the municipality. And upgrades to a road are not routine maintenance, but routine maintenance is excluded. And there's a 10-year time frame on this, so roads that are being added to incrementally over time could eventually hit the threshold and trigger Act 250 jurisdiction. So this is a complicated jurisdictional trigger. The House version. The House decided to use a different version of language, so you will see that. Yep.
So we get too stuck on this because we'll have other language to consider.
Yeah, and so the NRB report, the working group consensus was a road rule jurisdictional trigger. It was just a 2,000 foot jurisdictional trigger. It was not this 1,000 foot individual road trigger. There was a consensus on that. And I think the House landed on 800 feet, although I'm honestly having a hard time remembering all of the changes they've asked me to make. So yeah, and then, so this will apply in tier 2. And or tier 3 primarily, though you will want to consider once you get the House's bill. Because this excludes, it's not counting roads in the designated areas, but you are going to see in H687 an update to the designated areas, and so. Anyways, there's a lot of moving pieces here, but also I can't remember if we've had an overview of what the road rule was, and the fact that it used to exist, so we can talk about that too if you want at some point.
Right. I think in designated areas, it came up in conversations earlier because what if you did a whole housing development and it turned out by the time make the roads, but it's more than 1,000. So even for that's okay, yeah. Anyone want to pause more on this matter, or shall we keep marching?
Well, I don't wanna pause except to say that, this, maybe I'm misunderstanding, it almost seems straightforward, but you're saying it's not super straightforward. And I feel like I am probably missing or misunderstanding something.
No, great, if you understand it.
I don't know, this could be a conversation offline,
I think-
see if I do.
Could we have an explanation of the road? Could we do that? Could you explain what is now? I mean, because that's,
Well, sure,
I feel like I understand, but now.
Yeah, I'm like,
I don't
It's-
know if I can.
I think that when you start to do, when you start to ask me hypotheticals, I'm gonna run into confusion quickly.
Okay,
So yes, the construction of a private road that's greater than 2,000 feet is gonna trigger Act 250 jurisdiction.
okay.
So someone in the middle of, no, well, not in the middle of nowhere, but someone, a private entity constructing a long road. To a parcel of more than more than 1 acre is gonna trigger Act 250. But what if it's a lollipop road, small, yeah. How do we count those individual ones? And, so for a period of time, in the 80s, 90s, and early 2000s, there was the road rule. So the road rule was created by the former environmental board. We'll do the quick history right now, and I can get you more of a in-depth overview. So the environmental board had a ruling that they had authority to or clearly articulate development. And they created this thing called the road rule to give jurisdiction over roads. Because Act 250, at least in part, because Act 250 jurisdiction is not triggered by most residential development. But large development is still happening sometimes with residential uses. So this thing was created called the road rule, and it was amended quite a few times in its 26-year existence, because the board kept running into practical implications of implementing it. And one of the big issues that came up was there was a decision from the court that a road is not a driveway. And a driveway is not a road.
Yeah.
So, defining that, so that's why this version includes both roads and driveways.
I would offer the editorial comment, it could be gained, they could say, I have 790 feet of road and I have 790 feet of driveway. And I don't trigger any rule.
I see you.
Yeah. And then there have been these other questions about, well, if you make changes to an existing road, that's why there's all this language in here about upgrades and maintenance and. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I think the concern was for trying to not have force blocks. Of broken up into less functional environmental standpoint purposes. And we had data on water impacts, how that changes flora and fauna around, a developed road, so. To some people, a road sounds very benign, to other people, actually it has significant environmental impacts.
And Mr. Chairman, I might say, one thing that's interesting is I went through the process in Hartford where we changed our zoning. We did like a 5 or every 10-year update, whatever it was, I was on the select board when we did it. And one of the big questions was around, we have, I think it must be basically a version of the road rule in our own local zoning. But historically, when you look at Vermont development, people originally developed next to the road, or more likely, the road came to their house. So you have homes like in Norwich, for example, on Beaver Meadow Road, where they're on the road, like their windows, if you drive too quick, you could clip them. And that was purposeful, because you wanted access to your home and from the settlement. But over time, wealthier Vermonters in particular have chosen to have like the long winding driveways that have them up further away. And it's actually not a traditional settlement pattern that Vermonters have had. So while I know that we discussed like the historic, whether or not there is historic value to some of our settlement patterns, and is that kind of enshrined within like a way that we are discriminating against folks with our zoning. It is interesting how historically, if you look at Vermont, we used to develop next to the road. And then in the, what seems to be like the 70s, 80s and 90s, people could financially afford to have much longer driveways further out. So it isn't, I also think it takes away from some of the character, is a lot of what we talked about at the local level of the community, where you have these exceptionally long driveways. So I do just want to add that while I completely agree with the wildlife and forest block and all of that concept, it also is not in line with historically what some of these characteristics we've seen in our communities have helped. And it seems like it's primarily due to people who are able to afford having excessively long, like. And then a huge front lawn and then some kind of field and then up on a hill. And it's picturesque for them, but it breaks up the community and some of the ways that we used to develop, so. I think is also a historic concern, and that was the main conversation we had at Hartford, was less of the. Wildlife side, and more of the, how does it fit with the narrative we have as a community and some of these, what used to be central. Village centers, but are now kind of like random, astray, not our downtowns. So, there you go, so.
Yeah, the only other thing I would add is that in 2001, so the road rule had been a rule adopted in rule and amended by rule. And then in 2001, the legislature took action and abolished the rule and as a sort of trade established, at the time, it was the subdivision of 10 lots triggered Act 250. But they amended that so that in 10-acre towns, 10 lots would still trigger Act 250 for subdivision. But then they also added that in towns without zoning, 6 lots would trigger Act 250 jurisdiction. So getting at one of the issues that the road rule addressed, which was parcelization. So that was a sort of compromise that the legislature reached in 2001 to get rid of this. So we're still calling it the road rule, but this would be a road construction jurisdictional rule if you were to adopt it. It's not a rule. Just a, yeah. But the language that is in this version and that's in the House version, I took from the old road rule as a base to start the drafting, so. On page 23, we are kind of nearing the end, honestly, but on page 23, there are definitions for tiers 1A, 1B, 2, and 3. But they're mostly all the same. So they're an area defined by the board and mapped by the municipality's maps. And then for tier 3, it's also defined by the board and mapped by the regional land use maps that contain ecologically important natural resources. So, yeah, so we'll start there and then there's more information. So designation of tiers 1, 2, and 3. On or before December 15th, 2024, the General Assembly shall submit, or the board shall submit to the General Assembly a report on proposed definitions for the tiers. These definitions shall address the need for a healthy vacancy rate and the conservation goals of 30 by 30 and 50 by 50, which is chapter 89. In developing the definitions, the board shall conduct a public engagement process with a broad spectrum of Vermonters, including a focus on engaging renters, unhoused persons, and historically marginalized groups to hear input and feedback on the proposed tiers. On to page 24. On or before October 1, 2025, the board shall adopt guidance on the process for designating tiers 1, 2, and 3. The guidance shall at a minimum include the provisions for the following. Municipalities shall develop the application for designation and proposed maps of the areas and submit it to the Regional Planning Commission for comment and approval. The Regional Planning Commission shall then review the proposal and ensure it is consistent with the regional plan and provide additional technical input and advice as needed to improve the application. If the Regional Planning Commission concurs with the municipality's application, the municipality would submit the application to the board for approval. During this review, the Regional Planning Commission's concurrence would create a presumption that the application is consistent with the regional plan. If the RPC raises objections to the application, the municipality may choose to rework the application and resubmit it to the RPC, or go ahead and submit the application for review by the board without approval. In a later instance, the municipality would have to demonstrate to the board that the application is consistent with the regional plan and explain why it chose not to rework its application. On to page 25. The board would oversee a public review process, provide opportunities for comment, and then issue a determination on the application. There shall be a process before the board for challenging designation decisions at the time of the certification or recertification. The board's guidance shall establish qualifications for tier 1, which shall at a minimum include a municipal plan that is approved under 4350. Municipal flood hazard planning and applicable to the entire municipality in accordance with 438212 and the guidelines issued by the department. Flood hazard area and river corridor bylaws applicable to the entire municipality that are consistent with the standards established pursuant to 755B and 1428.
And I'm just flag as we go by this, so since we worked on this stuff in 213,
Oh, yeah.
we'll wanna look and, maybe you could, on behalf of the committee, check into Mr. O'Grady, check, see to what degree if this language were to stay, if, you would conflict with or alter, I don't know if it plays nicely based on the.
Yeah, I don't know anything about 213, so. You might know more about that than I do, but yeah, I think a takeaway. When you get the houses version. There will probably need to be a discussion of if 687 and 213 line up. I am not aware currently if they conflict. But I don't know what you all did.
In short, we have a pathway for new regulations and regulating river corridors as well as flood hazard.
So this is for tier 1A, or this is for tier 1, and so just as a preview, tier 1 is gonna get an Act 250 exemption, so these are the minimum qualifications. For what a town would need to get the exemption. Permanent zoning and subdivision bylaws that do not include broad exemptions that exclude significant private or public land development. Either from requiring a municipal land use permit or from development entirely. Permitted water and wastewater systems with the capacity to support additional development within the planned growth area. The municipality shall have adopted consistent bylaws by municipal plan and ordinance. On the allocation, connection, and extension of water and wastewater lines that include defined service area to support the planned growth area.
Planned growth area is it being defined somewhere, is it synonymous with a designated area?
Nope,
Okay,
so that's actually a typo. But really, we're talking about tier 1 areas, and I guess that is. We went back and forth about what we're calling these areas.
okay.
So, I think that they did eventually land on just tier 1.
Call them by
So-
label, sort of thing.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So this really is a typo from me, but the committee went back and forth on what we're calling these things. So,
Well,
yeah,
I remember when you drafted 308, it was like a question, because
Yeah.
we were creating a whole new scheme.
yep, so, also. That this whole section needs a lot of work, I think, so, take most of it, just as the concepts.
Right, we figured we'd take it all in and not bear down too hard on it, because we'll come through this in a way more detailed way later.
Yeah. So on page 26, and the applicable regional plan has been approved by the board. So. Tier 1 is not being fully defined here, it's asking the board to come up with definitions for it. But tier 1 is gonna get an exemption from Act 250 that's gonna be discussed in the next page or two. But they did but the committee did include this sort of list of minimum requirements for what a tier 1 area needs to have, and it's some of the basic things. Planning and zoning, the regional plan has been approved, and then they also have to have some bylaws on flood hazard areas, river corridors. And then they also have to have wastewater. So that is a basic construct. A lot of that is, all of that is in the house's proposal, but the house's proposal has additional requirements. Then next, on page 26, subsection D, on or before October 1, 2025, the board shall adopt guidance establishing the process for designating transportation corridors. The guidance shall at a minimum include provisions for the following: a definition of transportation corridor that includes the area within 100 feet of a class 2 or class 3 highway that is served by municipal sewer and water infrastructure. So just class 2 and class 3 highways are town highways. Class 1 highways are traditionally the state highways.
What's it for?
Is an unmaintained road by the town.
Class 4, yeah. Which hopefully no one's driving on,
Well,
makes it ATVs.
oh, right now, I mean, lots of people live on class 4 roads. So they're usually not paved, but they're not required, the town is not required to maintain them.
Okay, sorry.
We have people who live on class 4 roads.
Yeah.
Just off.
Oh, okay, that's why I was like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I-
Okay.
You know, I'm getting into conflict of interest. Home here, because I've lived in my home for 50 years on West Tree Road. And after I voted for the thing he built, my select board reclassified the road class 4. And
It's no longer maintained.
and this is real, so
This is.
What we're about.
yeah, it's real short.
What?
And the
Someone there will probably say correlation does not indicate causation.
Oh, you're right, no, you're right. I
Pardon?
mean,
I think someone would probably say, oh, correlation does not indicate causation, but it begs the question,
lots of other bills were passed last year.
see. So that was an action by the local select board. Last. July and August.
Yep, so, so next, municipalities develop the application for designation of a transportation corridor and propose maps of the area. And submit it to the regional planning commission for comment and approval. The regional planning commission shall then review the proposal and ensure it's consistent with the regional plan and provide feedback, so a similar process to tier 1. And the RBC may apply for designation of a transportation corridor that spans multiple municipalities. So this is a concept that Senate Economic Development came up with. It's not from the Act 250 report or in the House bill. It's again, it's gonna provide exemption in the transportation corridor. I think for housing, and so it's to encourage housing near roads. And then subsection E, on or before October 1, 2025, the board shall adopt guidance establishing the process for designating tier 3 areas. The rules shall at a minimum include the following provisions on page 27. Each respective RPC would recommend a mapping process for identifying tier 3 areas. This shall include a process for reviewing existing maps such as Vermont Conservation Sign or other available science-based resources, a process for public comment, and authorization of a statewide board to review and approve tier 3 designations. Each regional planning commission would be primarily responsible for conducting the mapping in consultation with municipalities based on consistent and robust standards and with additional resources and technical support from the state. The RPC would submit their maps to the state for approval through a public process with opportunities for public comment and appeal. Municipalities shall have an opportunity to challenge the RPC's proposed maps if they disagree with the RPC's determination. The regional planning commission shall conduct an environmental justice analysis to determine the costs and benefits of the tiers. If the cost and benefits of the tiers are distributed effectively within municipalities and the region. And on or before December 1, 2026, the board shall adopt necessary maps of the tiers. So. This is a really rough concept, in my opinion. The board, and so there's a statute that has some definitions of the tiers, but there's no information on what is included. Other than some of the information that's provided on what needs to be in the rules. So I encourage you to, as you work on this concept, to provide significantly more detail to the board. Because while you have the authority to delegate rulemaking to agencies, you have to delegate enough authority with enough detail on what they are supposed to do in order for it to be a constitutionally sound delegation. So, the first part of this is that it does ask the board to come back with some recommendations for proposed tiers. So that you could potentially update the statute to have more information in it. And then they're supposed to adopt rules. At the moment, I am slightly concerned that there is not enough detail in the statute to give the board sufficient direction on how they're supposed to construct this. I mean, there's nothing on tier 2. So tier 3, the only information that's provided is ecologically important natural resources. And then how the RPCs map them.
That's everyone.
Is your opinion that the 687 bill has sufficient detail?
Yeah, it's significantly I mean. Yes, there are very specific statutory processes for tiers 1, 2, 1, A and B. And then tier 3 is still a little bit more vague, but does have more information provided and a much more detailed rulemaking procedure.
Okay.
So,
One of the things that, I mean, I know we're not. I shouldn't give too much attention to this, but one of the things that caught my attention here was that each respective planning commission would recommend their own mapping process, so they can all be different.
Yeah.
And that seems concerning to me. Is that the case in the 687 version?
no.
Okay.
Yeah, and so on tier 1 also, or earlier, so the municipalities are also allowed to propose in this version, maps of how they would map their town to fit into these tiers. And so that does sort of raise the question of what's the timing on that? They are gonna need information on what to include in those tiers. And what if the town doesn't do anything? I guess they would just default to regular Act 250 jurisdiction, but it's a little unclear if the town didn't take any action to do any mapping. So there's more details needed.
Yeah, that kind of page 23 where the 50, 51, 52, 53 are all laid out. And the real guy with myself was, who is doing all this mapping, to what standard and in a timely way, and is there a statement? Are there guardrails on how the mapping could be done? One little annoying thing I've started to repeat about mapping is all maps are political, especially when you go to use them, and they're not just neutral data sets. So it seems like a fraught area potentially.
Okay, let's try to just get through the very last part of this before we all have to go. So, section 25 just adds that they update their municipal plans in regard to this. Including their maps. And then finally, section 26 is sort of what the goal of all this is, it's a set of exemptions for the tiers.
The punchline.
Yeah, so at the bottom of page 28, so notwithstanding any other provision of law, no permit amendment is required for any subdivision, development, or change to an existing project that is located entirely within a tier 1A area designated pursuant to 6032. So, we also didn't specifically carve out what is tier 1A or 1B, it's still left to the board. Unclear.
So would that extinguish an Act 250 permit for an existing Act 250 permit when a tier is extended into an area where there is an Act 250 permit?
Who knows? I don't know. It's not addressed.
Okay,
Interest.
The house doesn't, it goes a different direction. This is, and this doesn't say, and currently Act 250 jurisdiction is perpetual, and so. If this would just be an exemption. Whether or not it's extinguished, I think is an open question. I mean, it's not changing that statute, so probably not, but that is a question you're gonna need to think about.
right, because you can extend it here into a new area, there's already an Act 250 permit, if they do a substantial change, they want to add 12 units, whatever. Seems like they would be brought back into Act 250, because it's an amendment. But someone could develop something entirely new next to them and not be triggering Act 250 by reading that right.
No, so it does say no permit or permit amendment is needed. So,
Oh, okay,
yes, but it does leave the question of what happens to that existing Act 250 permit in this area where no Act 250 jurisdiction will be inserted.
thank you.
Yeah. Next, on page 29. Notwithstanding any other provision, no permit or permit amendment is required for 75 units or fewer of housing located entirely within a tier 1B area or a transportation corridor.
Senator Watson?
Sorry, I thought that as. Oh, never mind. Thinking of the temporary exemptions. For which 1B, the threshold is. Less.
So we don't currently have tier 1Bs.
Right, but in the. This is the steady state proposal. Right,
Yeah.
like this is sort of trying to describe where we're going,
Yeah,
and I had in my head, oh, tier 1B. Is like, I think it's like third.
there are,
That's
few-
for the-
in the early part of this bill, there are a few different numbers, yes.
And right, so 75, I associate. The tier 1A only because that was the temporary. Exemption. For. What the proxy is for tier 1.
Oh, yes, yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
okay, so I was just surprised to see tier. 1B associated with that, but that's because it's more. And this is a non-ramp, so there we go.
Sure.
Cool.
And then, oh, actually. Oh, see, yeah, number 3 actually goes back to your question, Senator Bragg. So upon receiving notice and a copy of a permit issued, see, I don't even remember what's in here. Issued by an appropriate municipal panel, a previously issued permit for development or subdivision located in a planned growth area. That's typo. Shall remain attached to the property, however, neither the board nor the agency of natural resources shall enforce the permit or assert amendment jurisdiction on the tract or tracts of land unless the designation is revoked. Or the municipality has not taken any action to enforce the conditions of the permit.
What does that mean?
It means the municipality is supposed to take over administering the Act 250 permit. If that is the case, the Natural Resources Board and the ANR don't have any authority to enforce those permits. If they don't take any action, it goes back to ANR and. But I don't think there's any other language actually. Anyways. This is a concept you'll have to talk about in more detail. It goes back to Senator Bray's question of what happens to those Act 250 permits where Act 250 no longer has jurisdiction, but there are existing permits.
Right, this whole thing was coming up before when we were talking about municipal delegation. So now municipalities were to start regulating. And they were gonna inherit Act 250 permits, and so who was going to, I don't know, adjudicate what that means? They had conditional uses. At one point, they were saying the conditions would be stripped from the permit, and so it was Pandora's box in terms of how it was gonna move forward in a smooth way. we could get there maybe, but then it raised a lot of questions a couple of years ago. I think we made it to the end of 26.
Yeah,
So thank you very much, and it's a couple minutes after 12. Any questions for Mr. Kowski? I know we're having you scheduled to come back tomorrow, so it's, we can have more questions. We also didn't, I don't think we, I'll have to look at my notes. We had some time with Counselor Kirby.
Oh.
Or no, it's Counselor Gray, went through all the stuff. I don't think we got through everything with Counselor Kirby.
okay,
So I think there's a little bit of the quilt we haven't quite covered. And then we will make it all the way through all of the missions. Right, so thank you, everyone.